Got another long one today. This one just might finally drive me insane. Consider this my general grievance. Intro's a touch long. I feel like the information is useful in providing context for this list. However, if you'd like to go ahead and just skip straight to the list, you can go to this time code, or just use the chapters I provided in the description. Star Wars has an optics problem. It's no secret that Star Wars has always had a lack of diversity problem, due in part to the time period when the original films were released. However, given George Lucas's general intent, and not to mention the woman he married, I wouldn't say the problem became truly systemic until Star Wars joined the Disney family. Disney already has a history of racial blunders and a noticeable amount of bullying or burying of their black characters. If you need some example, there's Princess and the Frog, for one. A decent film, maybe not the best in Disney's repertoire, but a solid enough movie where Disney's first black princess spends most of the runtime transformed into a frog. Disney would also use this movie as a scapegoat to kill their 2D animation department. Also, Pixar's Soul, a great film starring Pixar's first black lead character, who of course dies and spends a fair chunk of the movie as a little white soul ghost. And then later has his own soul transferred into a cat while his body is snatched by the voice of Tina Fey.
I hate that moving guy, he messed this up.
I often like to cite Onward in particular as well, a fantasy film that, despite being blue and an elf, for the longest time I thought he was supposed to be an orc or something, stars a bland white bread protagonist that, at this point, feels like we've seen from Disney a dozen times. And Chris Pratt masquerading as Jack Black. Now that in and of itself isn't really a problem, but what is the fact that this movie also features a surprisingly large cast of black or otherwise ethnically coded characters, and one may notice that just about every single one of them is either portrayed negatively.
This one's gone a little...
You're right, she has gone a little... It's no wonder with a wound like that.
Or winds up being the butt of many of the jokes and slapstick in the movie. The only exception being perhaps Disney's 20th first LGBT character that is inevitably cut from certain international releases. Of course, since it's a fantasy film, I suppose whether these characters are coded black is really up to interpretation. But I digress. This video is about Star Wars and not the myriad of issues with Disney as a whole. But it's the sort of thing that seems subtle at first, but these minor nitpicks and grievances start to build up over time until they eventually become a minefield of poor representation and a major problem. It's something that, on a one-on-one basis, may not seem like a real issue, or it may seem like it could be written off as a one-time thing or balanced out by something else, but when you take a look at it as a whole, it becomes very clear that these incidents are not isolated. I'd like to apologize to anyone who may have been oblivious to this bias problem until now, because with just the act of me stating it, you may not be able to unsee it. I myself had once hoped I could continue to ignore it, but now it consumes me whenever I watch anything. And that's why I'm here now, finally making a list about it. See, the way Star Wars has handled their POC, that's people of color, characters, has been less than stellar. Sure, there are a handful of heroes like ex-Stormtrooper Finn, the great swindler Lando Calrissian, and of course the baddest of all the Jedi, Mace Windu. But oftentimes it feels as though if you're black and in Star Wars, the only role for you to play is as part of the Empire. Like seriously, how many black folk in Star Wars are Imperial or Sith? Off the top of your head, can you think of any besides the three I just mentioned that aren't associated with having been in the Empire in some way? Background characters don't count. Well, that's the question I felt I needed to answer. And it was the question that prompted me to make this. Just to be clear, it is perfectly okay to have a black villain every now and then. Not all of your black characters have to be saints to be considered PC. It's okay and important even for characters to be flawed. But when it starts to feel like an overwhelming majority of your black characters are villains, that's when we start having problems. That's when the issue becomes systemic. And when it comes to Star Wars, it's not something I feel I can keep quiet about any longer. So I made a list. A list of every canon black character in Star Wars. I made this list to see just how many black characters actually do exist in Star Wars. Could it actually have been possible for Saw Gerrera to have
The 1,000-man march?
At Lando's summit? Additionally, I wanted to know, as I mentioned earlier, how many of these black characters had at any point in their lives been a part of or heavily associated with the Empire or the dark side of the Force. Before I begin, here are my disclaimers. The intention of this list is to include exclusively black characters in Star Wars, by which I mean characters that would be viewed as black, African, African American, or mixed in the real world. There are a handful of characters on the list that may not fully apply to this criteria for one reason or another. I've identified these characters as ethnically ambiguous, and will be listing them in a separate group later in the video. Likewise, for my own sake, I'll only be including canon characters. It was hard enough digging all of them up. As much as I love the Legends canon, trying to include it as well would be overwhelming. I have, however, included a small handful of non-canon characters, either due to them being personal favorites, or because I felt the list would be incomplete without them. I've also decided to include semi- or non-canon eras that have yet to be explored by canon Star Wars, like the Old Republic and the Legacy, Sith Imperial War eras. Non-canon characters will be listed in their own category so as not to disrupt the canonical character data. Initially, I wasn't planning on including the High Republic, for the same reasons I've skipped over it in the past. I'm not terribly familiar with the characters or stories from the era, and it's not yet part of what I'm considering to be the Star Wars mainstream, i.e. the films, shows, and other motion media, what they erased the Legends canon with. So, basically the same criteria those green as Goblin Moss stupas leaving comments saying that Legends was never canon are using. Of course, don't tell that to Thrawn, or Darth Bane. You can't de-canonize something that wasn't considered canon. Just saying. But again, I digress. That topic is a whole other video that I'll probably make eventually. Suffice it to say, at the last minute, I decided to go ahead and include the High Republic this time. For the sake of this discussion, however, I'll be treating it like how I'm treating the non-canon characters and keeping it in its own section, given the fact that one of the main goals of the High Republic is to include better diversity. It actually skews the results of my research and investigation on the topic. Now, one might think that it's because of that I should be including it into the main dataset. However, I'm choosing not to for the same reasons I almost didn't include it at all. Until, and if, the Acolyte finally happens, also featuring a Black Sith as the lead, by the way. The High Republic just isn't part of the mainstream enough yet. As of now, the only tangible motion media representation of the High Republic is Young Jedi Adventures, which is fine, but the High Republic feels a bit like if you got a cut on your arm, and then you go to get a band-aid, and you stick it on your arm, but you place it beside the cut rather than on top of it. While I appreciate what the High Republic is trying to do, coming from someone who hasn't actually read much of it yet, as of right now, it just isn't tremendously relevant to the overall storytelling of mainstream Star Wars. It essentially exists as a bias within the dataset that doesn't actually account for much when it comes to the area of Star Wars the data is specifically trying to examine, and that's why I'll be keeping it in its own category for now. Finally, I wanted to note that this list was initially planned to be a single video, but based on the amount of characters I've uncovered, and the amount of things I have to say about them, the length of this video has grown to a point where I'm going to have to split it into multiple parts. Right now, the plan is to release it as a full version of the video once each of the parts has been finished, but for the time being, I'll be releasing these videos by era, which should have us ending up with about 5 or 6 parts. Characters existing across multiple eras I plan to list in the era their presence was felt the most, or the era in which they first appeared. The quality marker criteria I'm looking for are these. 1. Is the character a hero, villain, or neutral? How are they generally perceived by other characters? 2. Are they a part of or have any heavy association with the Empire or the dark side of the Force? 3. Are they still alive? Has their story ended, or is there still value the character can provide to the world of Star Wars? 4. How big of a role do they play in the overall narrative? Are they a major or minor character, or just in the background? With all that out of the way, there are a lot of black characters in Star Wars, certainly more than you may think. So let's not waste any more time. The era I'll be starting with is the Fall of the Jedi. Adi Gallia. Starting off strong with a black character who also happens to technically be an alien. Still, being a Thalothian, I figured she had enough visible human-like skin to qualify. You may recognize her as one of the Jedi Masters on the High Council. She was also one of the voices heard speaking to Rey at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. Rise, Rey. She was born into a diplomatic family and was highly regarded by the Jedi and the Senate. So, that's a good start for Star Wars. Adi Gallia is a hero and has no strong association with the Empire or the dark side. Unfortunately, she is dead, as most of the Jedi from this era are due to Order 66, although Adi Gallia was killed earlier on by Savage Opress during the Clone Wars. Not to be confused with her cousin, Stass Allie, who did die during Order 66. I actually had no idea these were two separate characters until I stumbled across Stass's Wikipedia entry while further researching Adi Gallia. What's interesting about Stass Allie is that she was kind of created by accident. She first appeared in the Battle of Geonosis and Attack of the Clones. Basically, Lily Nyamwasa was brought in to replace Jin Clark, the actress who had played Addie Gallia, due to a change in the filming location. However, when the filmmakers realized that Nyamwasa looked too different from Clark, they created a new character instead, and thus Stass Allie was born. Like her cousin Addie, Stass is a Jedi, a hero, and has no association with the Empire or the dark side of the Force. Like her cousin, she is also dead. While Stass's role level is firmly locked as background, Addie Gallia gets a slight step up from the role she played in the Clone Wars series, and also nabbing the lead in Jedi Starfighter, giving her the rank of minor. Captain Quarsh.
Panaka.
This one hurts me. Captain Panaka was an iconic character despite only appearing in The Phantom Menace. He was a hero and a member of the Royal Naboo security forces. He's such a cool guy. When I first started making this list, I thought he'd be a fun, safe addition. But here's the kicker. After the fall of the Republic, Captain Panaka gets promoted to a high-ranking Imperial Moth. You think you know a guy. I actually thought things ended there, but as I was writing this entry, I found out he was later assassinated by Saw Gerrera's partisans 3 years before the Battle of Yavin. So, yeah. He may have been a hero at one point, but he does join the Empire, and now I know that he's dead too. Role level minor. Mace Windu. Mace Windu is a bad mother, and you just know that he is tired of all these Sith on this Senate. Truth thinly veiled as jokes aside, Mace Windu is far and away one of the coolest and most accomplished Jedi Masters to ever live. Also the first to sport an awesome purple lightsaber. It's not entirely clear if the lightsaber colors still have a particular meaning, though there hasn't been much to contradict that, but back in the Legends at least, each colored crystal generally signified a Jedi's place in the world. These are a bit oversimplified, but blue was more of a forceful fighting blade of the Jedi Guardians. Green was a more thoughtful blade for Jedi consulars who studied the nature of the Force. Red speaks for itself, crystals that burn with the dark side of the Force. In the Legends canon, these were made with synthetic crystals rather than the natural kyber crystals. However, that fact has since been retconned by the Disney canon, and now a lightsaber crystal is bled by killing with the dark side, which doesn't explain why Anakin's lightsaber was still blue by the end of Revenge of the Sith, but okay Disney, whatever you say. Yellow is the blade of the Jedi Sentinels, masters and protectors of the Force. And of course, Mace Windu's signature purple, which is the blade of a bad mother. It represents the perfect balance between the light and dark sides of the Force. You know, like red and blue. An aspect that is a large part of Mace Windu's character, particularly as he fights using Form 7, otherwise known as Juyo or Vapid. This particular form is aggressive and unpredictable, and is a form that typically causes its user to turn to the dark side. Mace Windu's ability to resist the temptation of the dark side makes him one of only 2 users of the form not to turn. I think Mace falls more so on the spectrum of positive representation, but I do have to note that he's not without flaws. Of course, flawed characters are good characters, so keep that in mind. He was prominently featured as one of the primary perpetrators of the Jedi Order's growing overconfidence during the end of the Republic. His stubborn and somewhat harsh behavior is at least partially to blame for both Count Dooku and Anakin Skywalker's turn to the dark side. Of course, they were both manipulated by other forces as well, but Mace is portrayed as kind of being the nail in the coffin for both of them, so... Furthermore, I'm not entirely sure how to classify him in regards to association with the dark side. Of course, as I previously stated, he was able to resist the temptations of the dark side, and of course, he never turned to the dark side or joined the Empire, but his use of Form 7 does give him a technical association with the dark side. With that said, I think it's subtle enough and outweighed by his ability to resist, so I'll say he's in good standing there. But it is something to note. There's also the fact that he's dead, though he at least had a pretty noble death, having died at the hands of the Emperor himself, only further proving himself to be a basically awesome dude. Although he's not a protagonist of any of the films, given his roles in each as well as in both versions of Clone Wars, and just his legacy within Star Wars as a whole, I'll happily give him a major role ranking. Also, who are these two? These two awesome Jedi are spotted in the Tales of the Jedi episode Choices, alongside Mace Windu during the funeral for Jedi Master Katri. I have not been able to find any information on who they might be, so if there's anything out there, please let me know. I assume, based on the fact that they have really cool and clearly thought out designs, that we'll find out something about them eventually, but as of now, at least as far as I can tell, they're just random nobodies. No affiliation with the Empire, probably dead, but maybe not. Definitely background. Steela Gererra, the sister of infamous Saw Gerrera, and something of a martyr for him and his rebel partisans. She was a hero to her planet and her people, although she ended up being Phage to further Saw Gerrera's ultimate cause. She doesn't have any associations with the Empire, and given her impact on Saw Gerrera, yet her limited use in the Star Wars universe, I feel her role ranking would be minor. Katooni.
Little Katooni, another Tholothian, and one of the Jedi Padawans in the, Padawan-focused episodes of the Clone Wars, I'd consider her role to be relatively minor, though she was significant enough to make an appearance in a vision Master Yoda had at the end of the Clone Wars. She's definitely a hero with no particular association with the dark side, although her fate is left ambiguous. Considering she was at the Jedi Temple during Order 66, I can't say her fate looks favorable, but you never know. Notable feats include probably one of my favorite scenes.
Don't worry, we have a plan. I think.
I'm flying!
No, not again.
Senator Larik, the Senator of Raxus Secundus, so I guess not Raxus Prime. No association with the Empire, but he was considered corrupt and was assassinated by his own guards in a coup. So things aren't looking good for him.
It's not looking good for you.
It's probably a good thing he died before the rise of the Empire, because I'm sure he would have found a way to be folded into that too. As it stands now, though, he has no association with the Empire, so I guess that's one notable positive. Minor role ranking. Kelleran Beq, Ahmed Best's grand re-entry into Star Wars. Kelleran Beq was a master who worked in the Jedi Creche, where he trained several Jedi younglings. Probably one of the coolest pieces of trivia about Beq was just his entry into canon. He started out as a non or sort of semi-canon character on the Jedi Temple Challenge show, which was kind of like the Star Wars version of Double Dare or American Ninja Warrior. As such, the show itself wasn't really considered canon, for reasons that I hope are obvious. That changed when Kelleran Beq was canonized in the most epic way possible, being thrust into a flashback sequence in The Mandalorian, where it was revealed that he not only survived Order 66, but was also the one responsible for rescuing Grogu. His scene is brief, but it does so much good for Black Star Wars representation as a whole. It's incredible. I think Best put it better himself when he spoke to Kristen Baver in an interview on StarWars.com about the Jedi Temple Challenge. I think what's most important about the representation of someone like Kelleran Beq, as far as being a person of color and the leader of this temple, kind of like the Dean of the Jedi, is it breaks down what's possible, it breaks down what you can do, and creates just a brand new world of possibilities out there. Where Kelleran Beq is now, we can only wonder. But he trained the future of the Jedi, and in rescuing Grogu, he preserved at least a small part of that future. A hero, living until proven dead, no association with the Empire. His ranking is in a bit of a gray area, given his role in rescuing Grogu, and just out of pure adoration, I really want to give him a major character ranking. However, I can't ignore that he only just became canon, and thus his only truly canon appearance was a single scene in The Mandalorian. Still, I cannot in good conscience rank him as just a background character either, so I guess I'll put him at minor, with a note that he probably should be ranked a little higher. I certainly hope we see more of him in the future. And a quick note about this probably unnamed Senate guard. For helping save Grogu, he's clearly a hero, probably doesn't have any association with the Empire. He's still alive here, so it's likely he may have survived this whole exchange, and definitely background. With only a few entries left for this era, this section is going to be one of the briefer videos. But it's time for the lightning round. Arvin Wendick played a minor role as one of the Naboo star pilots in Phantom Menace. He reappeared in the Empire Divided video game. No recorded death, so I assume he's alive, and he's a hero with no association with the Empire. Gideon Danu, portrayed by Christopher Kirby, he filmed a number of scenes as the Galactic Republic Senator in Revenge of the Sith. He joins a group opposing the Senate, but this was cut from the final film. Neutral affiliation, no association with the Empire, no known death, so I assume living. Would have been a minor role ranking, except his scenes were cut, so he's demoted to background at most. That's it for the first lightning round. Next, we'll take a look at some of the ethnically ambiguous characters that didn't quite make it into the full section of this list. Quinlan Vos. A fan favorite, Quinlan Vos was a Kifar Jedi Master whose fun-loving and maverick tendencies often got him in hot water with the ways of the Jedi. He was always one to follow his own path and often enjoyed both starting and ending fights around the temple, in spite of a personality that, on many other entries throughout this list, would result in generally negative characterizations. I feel it's worth noting that in Vos's specific case, these traits are generally presented as positive, which is a nice change of pace, and likely helped attribute to the character's popularity. Unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and rainbows with Vos. During the events of the canon novel Dark Disciple, which had been written based on a scrapped episode of the Clone Wars, Vos would end up in a bit of a rough spot. Working on a covert mission to assassinate Count Dooku for the Jedi Council, Vos would develop a romantic relationship with Asajj Ventress, who suggested he train on the dark side of the Force. This would eventually lead to Vos resolving to leave the Jedi Order, following the completion of his mission to kill Dooku. Furthermore, Vos inflicted significant damage to the Republic while undercover as Dooku's apprentice. Ventress would eventually sacrifice himself to save his life. In the end, Vos returned to the light side of the Force and briefly rejoined the Jedi Order prior to Order 66. It is yet to be made clear if Vos is still alive, but it's been shown that he managed to survive the Jedi Purge. Captain Gallia Typho. The captain of the Royal Naboo security forces during the Clone Wars, portrayed by New Zealand-Australian actor Jay Lagaya, of Samoan descent, Captain Typho plays a significant minor role as a protector of Padme Amidala. Certainly not an easy task, and would go on to join the Amidalans, a resistance group with the goal of finding and killing those responsible for Padme's death. He's a hero with no association with the Empire, and seems to still be alive. Bail Organa, an icon of the Galactic Senate and the Rebellion, and the adoptive father of Princess Leia Organa. In the films, he's portrayed by Jimmy Smits, an American actor of mixed Dutch and Puerto Rican descent. Bail tragically died when his home planet of Alderaan was obliterated by the Death Star. He was noble, kind, and always used his power as a senator to help those in need whenever he had the chance. He was a friend to the Jedi and one of the founding members of the Galactic Alliance. He died a hero, and his legacy would forever live on in Leia. Given the role he's played across various Star Wars media and his role within the Rebellion itself, I think Bail has done enough in his lifetime to earn a major character ranking. Kitster Banai. Of course, I can't leave out Kitster, young Anakin Skywalker's best friend, portrayed by Dhruv Chanchani. Kitster was a fellow slave, friend, and member of Anakin's pod racing pit team. He was confident and positive, and was very supportive of Anakin, at least outside of that incident with the pod racer repairs.
I'm in the boot race tomorrow. What? With this?
I'll be honest, I thought things were going to end there, but it seems Kitster's story continued on in both canons. Since my primary focus for these videos is on canon Star Wars characters, I'll only be discussing how Kitster ends up in canon, but his history and legends is intriguing as well. Kitster would eventually be freed from slavery by Sabe, who you may know as one of Padme's royal handmaidens. If you've been keeping up with the Darth Vader comics, you may also have heard that Sabe recently made a reappearance as the leader of the Amidalans, with her visual similarity to Padme briefly confusing Darth Vader himself. During Sabe's adventures with Vader, Kitster would be unwittingly reunited with his childhood friend, as Sabe had enlisted Vader's help in freeing the colony Kitster moved to after being freed, from a governor whose meddling was causing a drought that led to attacks by beasts called Tangor. Kitster wound up being rescued by Darth Vader. And that seems to be about it for Kitster for now. As far as I can tell, he's still alive, and although he's just a minor character, he's made an impact on the galaxy in his own little way. I realize that Darth Vader was literally his childhood friend, but as Kitster has not joined the Empire, nor did he become aware of Vader's identity or anything like that, I'm going to classify him as not having any association with the Empire. Depa Billaba, one of the Jedi Masters on the High Council, portrayed by former Indian actress Deepika O'Neil Jyoti. She was trained by Mace Windu and became a member of the Jedi Council at the same time as he did. She was a background character up until she was made into Caleb Jarrus's Jedi Master during the Clone Wars, which upgraded her rank to minor. She was a hero with no association with the Empire. She died during Order 66. And now on to some honorable mentions. This section is dedicated to characters that really don't qualify for this list, particularly fully alien characters who may only have black coding or loose associations. Starting off, I want to highlight Ahsoka Tano, in terms of eligibility for being coded black, she's a bit of a gray area, especially since she was initially voiced by the absolutely fantastic Ashley Eckstein. However, even prior to her live-action casting as Rosario Dawson and the subsequent young Ahsoka casting of Ariana Greenblatt, I know the general consensus amongst artists of color was that they, myself included, by the way, generally pictured a human Ahsoka as being some kind of ethnic background. I think, more often than not, I saw her being depicted as mixed, and let me tell you, I was here for it. So, I was pleasantly surprised when Rosario Dawson was cast to play her in live action, or at least soft affirming the idea. I wasn't really sure where I wanted to place Ahsoka on this list, as she's now had such a long and storied history that she spans at least 3 separate eras of Star Wars. Ultimately, I decided I'd place her here, in the Clone Wars era where it all started. I could spend, honestly, an entire video series discussing how great of a character Ahsoka is, but I've already spent enough time on this list, so I'll leave it there. I'm not really sure if I need to give my ranking criteria for the honorable mentions, since they technically don't play into my overall study, but I guess since I'm here, affiliation hero, no heavy association with the Empire, status alive and kicking, rank major character. Jar Jar Binks. Love him or hate him, Jar Jar was an iconic part of the prequel trilogy. He's also played by Ahmed Best, and very much coded black to the point where it's a little bit problematic. He's played for comedy relief, and his legendary clumsiness has caused theories to arise of him secretly being a Sith Lord, which obviously isn't true. Unless... I jest. As a naive child when the Phantom Menace first came out, I never particularly hated Jar Jar, and to many he was redeemed by the events of the Clone Wars. While Jar Jar was never really a part of the Empire, he was tragically the singular driving force that helped to allow the Empire to rise. It was Jar Jar's proposed vote to instill emergency powers to Chancellor Palpatine that ultimately led to the creation of the Galactic Empire. This would more or less result in the end of Jar Jar's career as a senator, and the act of playing Jar Jar for a long time almost ruined Ahmed Best's career. Jar Jar, after being outcast once more on Naboo, would go on to become a street performer in Theed. He may have been scorned by the adults, but the children loved him. I understand it's a bit of a reference to the realistic results of the problems he caused, and somewhat a reference to his real-life reception, but personally I think Jar Jar's ultimate fate was a little harsh. At the very least, he seems to still be alive, and played a major role in the prequel trilogy. And now, as things are winding down, here's this episode's dishonorable mentions. The dishonorable mentions are reserved for characters who may have been altered to the point of losing their representation, or becoming bad representation, or, and most, and particularly in this case, are characters that display overly aggressive or negative demeanors towards coded characters, and or characters of color. Qui-Gon Jinn. As cool as Qui-Gon Jinn was, he's unfortunately made it onto this list due to his treatment of Jar Jar Binks. Given Jar Jar's general demeanor, one might at first assume Qui-Gon's responses to it are justified. However, when your opening line to coming into contact with an unfamiliar being is,
"Ability to speak does not make you intelligent. Now get out of here."
you may have some more deeply rooted issues. Qui-Gon consistently demeans and underestimates Jar Jar, and rarely, if ever, treats him as an equal. But I think I've spoken long enough. That's all I've got for the Fall of the Jedi. Let me know if there are any characters you think I've missed, or who you're looking forward to seeing in the next one, when we tackle the rise of the Empire and the Age of Rebellion. Thank you for watching. This is Chiin Ferno, signing off. Could it actually have been possible for Saw Gerrera to have his 1,000-man march? After the fall of the Republic, Captain Panaka, Mace Windu is a bad egg mother trucker, and you just know that he is tired of all these monkey-fighting Sith on this Monday through Friday Senate. Basically a awesome dude. Only further proving himself to be a basically awesome dude. And I do not think that using the selfie stick like this is going to be the best filming technique. I definitely am going to have to either stick with the camera